Hey everyone, it's Tony. In this video, we'll be going over a medium-level SQL interview question that was asked in a Uber interview. It's called user's third transaction. In this question, Uber gives us a transactions table, giving us the user ID as an int, spend as a decimal, and transaction date as a timestamp. So you can see here an example input of the table, what it might look like. So you can see here that we have user ID 111, which is the same person, and they spent these amounts on these dates. And we have two other users who spend these amounts on these dates. I want to mention that this table is sorted from the earliest transaction date to the latest. So any transaction after February 5th, 2022 at this time will be appended to the bottom of this table. Now, what do we want to output from this input table? The question is user's third transaction. So we want to output all the third transactions of all the users. So only the third transaction of all the users, if there are any third transactions for a given user. So in this table, we can see that this is the first transaction of user ID 111. This is the second, and this is the third. So we put this row in this table. And we can see for user 121, they only have one transaction. So we don't add any records with user ID 121. And same goes for user 145. In order to solve this problem, we can use the window function called row number. But let's start by selecting the user ID, the spend, and the transaction date, because we can see that the output table has these three columns as well. Now, this is where the question is mainly testing you on. Next, we have to do row number over. And we want to partition by the user ID because we want to see chunks of the same user ID's transactions, one after the other. And from those partitions, we want the ordering of the transaction date to be from the earliest to the latest, because we want the third transaction, not just some random transaction out of a user's group of transactions. So we need to, following this, order by transaction date as well. And after I run this, you guys can clearly see what this query is trying to do. And the table is called transactions. So here what I'm doing first is creating a table with 4 columns where 3 of them are in the output table. And one of them is using this window function called row number. As you guys can see, the above query is partitioning all the user IDs into their own partitions or chunks. So 111, all of the records are together. 121, all the records are together. User ID 145, and so on and so forth. And within these partitions, so every partition, we're ordering by transaction date. So as you can see here, user ID 111's transaction dates go from earliest to latest. So January 8th, 10th, and then February 5th. Same goes for 121, January, April 1st, April 3rd, and so on and so forth within the partitions themselves. So that's what this part is doing. And row number is assigning each transaction a sequential order, essentially. So for the same user, the first transaction will label as 1, second one will label as 2, third one will label as 3. And this is the case for every user. So for 121, again, we start at 1 for their first transaction, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. We do this because afterwards, we can easily query which users have a third transaction. Because we can see clearly 145 only has 2 transactions by just looking at the row number column. And users 111, 121, and 263 all have a third transaction, like so. So let's alias this column as row num for clarity. And from here, we can use this query as a subquery or intermediate table to select from again. So I'll also select these columns on the outside because the final output table, we want only those 3. From, I'll put this whole table in brackets, and I can alias that as the table with the transaction numbers. As I mentioned previously, we only want the third transactions of the users. So we need where this row num column, so this column, equals 3 only, and then we should be good. If I run that code, we can see we're only left with the 3 users mentioned before that we saw had a third transaction, and these are their respective spends and transaction dates. We can also use a common table expression to make things more readable, and by that we can just do with, copy paste this alias name, as we can just cut all of that. So all of this table will be stored in transaction number. So the table generated by this query will be stored in transnum. So all we have to do is select the necessary columns from transnum where row number equals 3, and we should get the same results. Syntax error. Right, we don't need as here. Just like that, we're good. We submit. Looks like our solution's accepted. I also want to additionally add, which some of you may be wondering, why are we using row number? Why not rank or dense rank? We always have to look at the context of the question when determining which window function to use. So in this one, if let's say a user had, for whatever reason, 2 transactions on the exact same date and time. So the transaction date value is the exact same for whatever reason. So in that case, do we count both of them as one transaction, or do we split them into unique transactions? Well, we need to split them into unique transactions because 2 transactions are 2 different transactions no matter what time they were transacted at, right? So let's say user ID 111 had 2 transactions at the exact same date here. The next transaction would be a 4th transaction because you can't have a 3rd transaction twice. There can only be 1 third transaction. Hopefully that intuitively makes sense. That's all for this video. Consider to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.